I want you to imagine an extraordinarily successful, highly complex society.
Okay, setting the scene.
Yeah, a society that has thrived here on Earth, navigating changing climates, shifting continents, and mass extinctions.
Right. Surviving all the big ones.
Exactly. Now, I want you to imagine that this society has done all of this for 80 million years without a single male ever existing. Not once.
I mean, you would usually expect a premise like that to be the setup for like a high concept science fiction novel.
Totally.
Because we are so incredibly conditioned to look at the natural world through this strict lens of pairs and partnerships.
Right, the idea that you absolutely need to.
Exactly. We just assume duality, like a male and a female, is this mandatory, non-negotiable engine of complex life. But the biological reality we are exploring today profoundly challenges that assumption.
It really does.
Today, we're looking at the sheer, unbroken power of singular sufficiency.
So when I first grabbed this stack of research for today's deep dive, it's this fascinating collection of sources titled Entirely Female Worlds: Biology, Cosmology, and the Self-Sufficient Female Principle. I honestly thought we were going to be reading theoretical biology.
Which is a fair assumption.
Right. But this isn't theory. We are looking at hard biological realities happening right outside your window right now.
And we're aligning those realities with the ancient mythologies of our ancestors.
Yeah. And together, they kind of reveal this mission for our deep dive today. They show the female principle not as a counterpart to the male, or, half of a whole, but as the generative, completely foundational baseline of existence.
And to really understand how paradigm shifting this is, we kind of have to start with the biology.
Let's do it.
The most definitive evidence for entirely female worlds comes from species where males simply do not exist in the biological record at all.
So we aren't talking about like a mixed population where the males are just temporarily absent.
No. Or highly territorial and living on the other side of the mountain. We are talking about lineages where the male biological form has literally never appeared.
Okay, let's unpack this and start small with a creature called the brilloid rotifer.
Right, the microscopic aquatic animals.
Yeah. And as I mentioned at the top, they have been entirely female for roughly 80 million years. They reproduce completely without males.
Which is a staggering amount of time.
It is. But let me stop here, because anyone who remembers high school biology is probably throwing a red flag right now.
Oh, absolutely. Because asexual reproduction is basically cloning.
Exactly. And over millions of years, cloning usually leads to an evolutionary dead end because there is no genetic variation.
Right. If a single disease comes along, it just wipes out the whole identical population.
So how on earth do they survive 80 million years?
Well, that is the standard biological rule, yes. The widely accepted theory is that sexual reproduction evolved specifically to shuffle the genetic deck.
To ensure variation.
Right, vital variation to survive diseases and changing environments. But the boudoid rotifer completely bypasses this requirement.
Which is wild.
It is. Despite having no males to mix genes with, they are actually among the most genetically diverse animal groups ever studied by science.
But how? I mean, if they aren't shuffling the deck with a partner, where is the new genetic material coming from?
Through an astonishing physical mechanism called horizontal gene transfer.
Okay, what is that?
So, boudoid rotifers live in temporary freshwater environments. Puddles, bird baths, patches of moss.
Stuff that dries up.
Exactly. When that puddle dries up, the rotifer faces a crisis. It essentially mummifies itself to survive the drought, which is a process called anhydrobiosis.
Okay.
And during this extreme desiccation, the rotifer's cell membranes actually crack open and its own DNA splinters.
Wait, really? It breaks its own genetic code just to survive a dry spell?
It does, yeah. But the magic happens when the water returns, the rotifer rehydrates.
Okay, and then what?
Well, as those cracked cell membranes seal back up, they accidentally trap fragmented DNA from completely different kingdoms of life that happen to be dead or decaying nearby in the water.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, they pull in genetic material from bacteria, from fungi, from algae.
That's incredible.
And as the rotifer repairs its own splintered DNA, it inadvertently stitches those foreign genes directly into its own genetic code.
Okay, so think about it like this for you listening. We usually think of reproduction and genetic diversity like a collaborative recipe.
Sure.
A recipe that absolutely requires two chefs bringing different ingredients to the kitchen.
Right, the traditional view.
But the boudoid rotifer is like a master chef who simply walks through a global market just grabbing whatever amazing ingredients she wants directly from the environment.
I love that.
Yeah, she just uses them to create this vibrant, diverse menu all on her own.
That's a perfect analogy. And what's fascinating here, the critical why this matters insight, is that these species are not diminished.
They aren't incomplete.
Exactly. They aren't missing something. They developed an entirely different, highly successful mechanism for genetic variety.
Which challenges everything.
It fundamentally challenges the assumption that sexual reproduction is the only or even the best way to ensure evolutionary success.
Okay, so it's easy to dismiss rotifers as these bizarre, microscopic exceptions. But what if we scale up? Could a complex, multicellular animal actually pull off a male-free existence?
Oh, absolutely. Biology does not force duality just because an organism gets big enough to have a spine.
Really?
Yeah, the sources point us to several species of whiptail lizards in the genus Espedocilus.
Oh, right.
These are complex terrestrial vertebrates running around in the deserts of the Americas right now, entirely female species.
No males exist at all.
None.
But, you know, a lizard can't dry itself out and absorb DNA from a fungus like a rotifer.
No, they definitely can't do that.
So they have to be reproducing through cloning. Don't they eventually run into that exact same dead-end problem of accumulating genetic mutations?
Well, they reproduce through a process called parthenogenesis, meaning the females produce offspring from unfertilized eggs.
Okay.
But to avoid the trap of pure cloning, they utilize this brilliant biological workaround.
Which is?
Normally, in sexual reproduction, an egg has half a set of chromosomes waiting for sperm to provide the other half.
Right.
The whiptail lizard alters this process. Before the egg is even formed, the female cells undergo a chromosomal doubling.
Wait, so she provides both halves herself?
Precisely. She duplicates her own genetic material, creating an egg with a full set of chromosomes.
That's wild.
And because of how the chromosomes recombine during this doubling phase, the offspring are not exact, identical clones of the mother.
They're like near copies.
Exactly, genetic near copies. This subtle internal shuffling maintains just enough genetic variety to keep the population incredibly robust.
That answers a massive question for me, honestly. I always assumed all female populations in the wild were just like fragmented groups.
If they lost their males recently.
Yeah, like an environmental disaster happened and they were just desperately holding on, waiting for males to evolve back into the picture.
No, they are not stranded populations waiting for rescue. These are stable, self-sustaining species persisting across thousands of generations exactly as they are.
So they are a fully realized, complete biological system.
Completely.
Okay, so we've established that a completely male-free existence is viable from the microscopic level up to complex reptiles. But let's transition a bit.
Sure.
What happens when we look closely at the foundational building blocks of species that actually do have males? Let's talk about insects for a second.
Right, let's look at aphids and specific types of wasps. In these populations, the default everyday organism is female.
The baseline.
Yes. The vast, overwhelming majority of the species' existence, the labor, building nests, gathering resources, reproduction happens entirely within an all-female framework.
Wait, if the females are doing literally everything required to sustain the species, why do males even exist in these insect populations?
Well, males appear primarily as a seasonal or stress-triggered anomaly.
An anomaly.
Yeah, they are a temporary biological event. When the environment gets harsh, maybe a food shortage or winter is coming, the biology of the female aphids shifts to produce males temporarily.
Ah, so it functions as a crisis mechanism.
Exactly. The males exist purely to scramble the genetics as quickly as possible, creating winter-hardy eggs before dying off. The structural baseline existence of the species is female.
Okay, let me play devil's advocate here.
Go for it.
We're talking about insects and lizards. But when we look at mammals, or humans, the population is roughly split 50-50.
Right.
If the populations are completely equal in mammals, how can one be a baseline and the other an anomaly? Doesn't mammalian biology require both equally from the very beginning?
It requires both for reproduction, yes, but not for embryonic development.
What do you mean?
When we look at mammalian embryology, the physical developmental baseline, the default template for every single mammalian embryo, including you and me, is female.
Really? The default is female?
Yes. During the first few weeks of human gestation, the embryo develops bipotential gonads and a set of structures called the Mullerian ducts.
And those structures naturally develop into female anatomy?
Without any external instruction, yes. Without the active intervention of very specific chromosomal and hormonal signals, all mammalian embryos will simply continue to develop along that female pathway.
Wow.
The change only happens if the embryo possesses a Y chromosome, specifically a gene called SRY.
Okay, and what does that do?
The SRY gene acts as a literal interrupter. It triggers a cascade of testosterone that actively halts the default female development and forces the tissue to diverge into male structures.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting. If the mammalian default is female, does that mean biologically, maleness is essentially an adaptation?
Yes.
Like it's a variation that actively has to diverge from this original self-sufficient blueprint.
From a developmental biology standpoint, that is exactly what it is. At the level of biological origin, femaleness is not a specialization, it is the baseline.
That is wild.
It really asks you to critically rethink how we view biology. We often assume male and female forms co-evolved as parallel equals from scratch, but the embryological reality shows the female form is the original substrate.
The substrate from which other forms differentiate.
Exactly.
That fundamentally flips the script. And what blew my mind going through these sources is that long before humans had microscopes to see rotifers or understand embryology, our ancestors somehow intuitively grasped this.
They really did. This is where the hard biological reality and the mythological record act as incredible mirrors for one another.
It's so cool. They wove this concept of the self-sufficient female origin into their absolute oldest cosmologies.
Right, long before modern science. Across widely separated ancient human traditions, we find origin cosmologies where the generative principle of the universe is entirely female.
Yeah, like when I was reading this section on ancient Sumeria, there's the figure of Namu.
The primordial ocean.
Right. She is self-arising and self-generating. She produces heaven and earth directly from within herself with no male constant.
No fertilization required. And we see the same thing in ancient Egypt with Neith.
Oh, I had to reread the passages about her. She's one of the absolute oldest deities in the Egyptian tradition.
Predating even the dynastic period. Yeah.
And she is completely self-created. She generated the sun, Ra, without being fecundated by an external force.
And the most powerful metaphor the sources highlight from her ancient texts is her epithet. She is described as both the weaver and the loom.
Let's unpack that for a second because it's a massive distinction.
It really is.
Usually when we look at ancient myths, a creator god is just the weaver, right? Like an active consciousness manipulating raw material.
Exactly, taking clay or cosmic dust that already exists.
But calling Neith the weaver in the loom implies intrinsic wholeness. She is the active creative force and the very material of existence itself.
She operates entirely from her own nature. It is a completely self-contained system of creation.
But let me push back a bit just to clarify for the listener. We're so used to these partnership myths, right?
Yeah.
Like a sky father and an earth mother.
Very common, yes.
Are these deities like Neith just examples of ancient matriarchies where the female goddess is simply dominant over the male god?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the sources specifically state these are not partnership cosmologies.
Okay.
And they aren't about dominance either. There is no male principle present at all to be dominated. It is absolute singularity.
Got it.
We see this exact same framework in the indigenous traditions of the Americas, too.
Right, the spider grandmother or earth mother figures.
Yes. She acts as a singular, originary creative consciousness. She sits in the primordial void and she thinks, or dreams, or literally sings existence into form without a co-creator.
And there's also the Hawaiian Kumalipo.
The creation chant, yes.
The sources note that in the Kumalipo, life arises from elemental forces like darkness, heat, moisture, before gendered forms even exist.
Exactly. This originary state is generative and receptive, qualities directly associated with the feminine principle at the root of the cosmos.
Okay, so we're seeing this at the microscopic level with the rotifer, all the way to the cosmic scale with Namu and Spider Grandmother.
Right.
So what does this all mean? What is the philosophical through line connecting these worlds?
The through line is a radical rethinking of how we define completeness.
How so?
The female principle, at its origin, is not defined by its relationship to maleness. It is defined entirely by its own generative, self-sustaining nature.
It's not a response to anything.
Exactly. The all-female whiptail lizard doesn't exist as a response to anything. It just exists as itself. An entirely female world is not a subtraction.
It's not a world with something missing.
No, it operates from a different and biologically more original principle of organization where completeness and creative power are intrinsic.
So it's like listening to a breathtaking solo acoustic performance and mistakenly wondering, where is the rest of the band?
That's a fantastic way to put it.
In reality, the solo performance isn't missing a drummer or a bassist. It is the original complete art form.
And this raises an important question for you, our listener.
Yeah.
Why do we default to assuming duality or contrast is necessary for completeness? The evidence across both biology and ancient cosmology proves that entirely female worlds are not just theoretical ideas.
Right, they are real.
They're entirely male-free at every level and have existed longer than most life forms on this planet.
Which brings us to why this matters for you. Whether you are prepping for a biology class, reading ancient history, or just observing nature, understanding this concept fundamentally rewrites how you view independence.
In relationships.
Exactly. It changes how you view the baseline of life itself. It shows that sometimes the ultimate form of completeness requires no counterpart at all.
It really is a profound shift in perspective.
And I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over. We talked about how these ancient female lineages, like the rotifers, have sustained themselves through cloning or absorbing environmental DNA. Well, as humanity's scientific and technological evolution rapidly advances, perhaps one day allowing us to artificially synthesize genetic diversity without the need for biological sexes, would we actually be stepping into a radical, uncharted science fiction future? Or would we simply be returning to the planet's oldest biological baseline? Something to think about.